Hey guys, this is Bob with Thrive Wellness. Today's wellness presentation topic is controlling hunger. So, control hunger, control eating habits, and control weight. Tips and strategies to control your hunger. So, throughout our wellness program, we've touched on hunger from a variety of different standpoints. From an emotional standpoint, from more of a mind control standpoint. And today we're going to really dive into kind of the physiological aspects of controlling hunger. So we're going to touch on hunger from a number of different angles, and keep in mind the end goal of controlling your hunger is hopefully having better control over weight management principles. So we'll dive into defining exactly what hunger is, what drives us to eat. We'll touch quite a bit on kind of hunger from the standpoint of our hunger and satiety hormones and what regulates those hormone levels. We'll take a look at the foods that can help us balance those hormone levels with the goal in mind of weight management. We'll take a look at some foods that tend to really spurn hunger and make us feel hungrier in the long run, as well as what foods tend to help us control hunger. Then we'll look at some successful general habits with respect to controlling hunger, and we'll kind of pull it all together with a recap at the end. So let's define hunger. So we can look at hunger from a couple of different standpoints. The one we probably think most of is that basic physiological hunger or physical hunger. So it's kind of the physiologic drive to consume food to satisfy the body's need for energy and nutrients. So it's basically that rumbling when we get in our stomach when we get hungry, when we're about to sit down to a meal. There's also more of an emotional or psychological hunger, and this is the drive to consume food stemming from an emotional need to cope with stress or provide temporary comfort. For the purposes of our discussion today, we'll spend most of the time dealing with physical hunger. Again, we have dealt with emotional hunger and controlling kind of stress eating in some discussions we've had in the past, as well as approaching eating from a mindfulness point of view. So I am going to post those discussions to the portal as well, along with this discussion on controlling kind of the physical aspects of hunger. So next we'll talk about the hunger mechanism in the body. So hunger is governed in the body by a complex array of hormones. There are probably over 20 different hormones that are involved in regulating hunger and appetite. We'll focus on four key hormones involved in kind of balancing out hunger, our appetite, our intake. And these hormones have a lot to do with blood sugar levels as well as they pertain to hunger. So we'll look at leptin and ghrelin, kind of the hunger and the satiety hormones, as well as other hormones such as insulin and glucagon, and how those four key hormones kind of work together to balance out our hunger and our appetite. There are a number of different lifestyle factors as well that influence our perceived hunger. We'll take a look at the first two, especially in this discussion. So, food choices. What food choices we make that either in the long term can spurn hunger and make us feel hungrier 2 or 3 hours later after consuming a meal, and what food choices can help us control our appetite and keep us feeling fuller longer, so that hopefully the goal in mind is portion control, right? And in pursuit of maintaining our weight over time. But there are a number of other lifestyle factors that influence our perceived hunger as well. Things like stress, the environment, our activity level, and certainly sleep habits play a big role in how hungry we feel, especially if we're not getting adequate sleep. Those hormones can really be thrown out of whack, and that especially can make us crave carbohydrate-rich foods, sugar-rich foods. So in a moment here, we're going to look at kind of that complex apparatus that balances our hunger, that regulates our hunger, specifically dealing with those four key hormones that I mentioned a moment ago. Hormones, hunger, and weight management. So appetite and the regulation of appetite is a very, very complex apparatus. So these four hormones that we'll focus on tend to do most of the work, but if you want to really break it down, there's 20 or more different hormones and mechanisms that are involved in balancing appetite. So the four key ones that we'll look at are insulin, glucagon, leptin, and ghrelin. So we'll look at leptin first. So leptin is the satiety hormone. It's secreted by the fat cells when blood sugar is high. So leptin's job is telling you that you're full, right? Stop eating. Ghrelin's job as the hunger hormone is secreted by the stomach when blood sugar is low. So ghrelin's job is telling you we're low on energy stores, it's time to eat, we need blood sugar. So leptin and ghrelin work together very closely with the next two hormones, glucagon and insulin. We'll talk about insulin first. So in the fed state, so just after a meal, insulin levels typically run high. Insulin's job is to pull glucose out of the bloodstream and into the muscle and into the liver to be utilized as energy. So insulin does a few things. Insulin signals the body to use glucose as energy, and it also is a storage communicator. So if insulin is high, it's telling our body to store energy as fat and utilize the glucose that's immediately available. So leptin, the satiety hormone, and insulin work very closely together. So insulin is signaling utilize the energy that you just brought into the body and store the excess. And at the same time, leptin is telling you stop eating. We have enough energy, stomach is full, we're good to go. So that brings us to the hormone glucagon. So glucagon's focus is really opposing what insulin does in the body. So when blood sugar levels begin to dip off a fair length of time after a meal, glucagon tells the body to utilize stored components as energy. So this is going to come in the form of glycogen, which is a stored glucose in the muscles. And also, if glycogen stores are empty, then glucagon signals the body to begin to utilize stored fat as energy. So glucagon and ghrelin, the hunger hormone, tend to kind of work again in conjunction with one another. If you're in the fasted state and glucagon is beginning to kick in, that's about the same time you're going to notice those typical hunger pangs that you get when your stomach is empty. And that's when ghrelin, the hunger hormone, is signaling that you need to bring calories into the body. Okay, so why the fascinating discussion on these hormones? Well, it turns out the foods that we choose play a big role in helping us get these hormones to work in our favor. For instance, if we choose foods that tend to spike insulin, refined carbohydrates, sugary rich foods, foods that have a lot of energy, once we spike insulin, as a result of the foods we eat, that signals the body to store energy as fat. So again, just choosing the wrong foods can signal our body to actually store the calories we're bringing in as fat. Conversely, if we choose the right types of foods that tend to keep our blood sugar and our insulin levels more stable over time, things like whole grains, things like beans, things like fruits and vegetables, lean meats. If we're making these choices, that's keeping our insulin levels more steady over time. And that's actually allowing glucagon to do some of its work when blood sugar does dip a little low. Then we can start utilizing some of the stored energy, i.e. fat, as energy. And that's when weight loss can occur. So this graphic illustrates what might happen in the body when we eat two different types of meals. So meal A is going to be a meal that is high in refined carbohydrates, i.e. white breads, pasta, simple snack foods, or sugar-rich foods. So you can see as we eat those foods, what happens? The blood glucose begins to climb very quickly. And that also creates a similar climb in insulin. And remember what happens when insulin is high. Insulin tells our body to store fat. And then as blood glucose levels begin to drop off, as insulin is doing its job and pulling that glucose into the muscles, into the liver, you begin to see that the glucose levels drop off. And that's when you typically get those low blood sugar cravings. So when your diet most frequently consists of a lot of simple carbohydrates, sugar-rich foods, and larger portions, what tends to happen is you get these very high peaks and valleys of blood sugar. So that creates a situation in the body where body wants to store fat as insulin levels and glucose levels are high. Then you bottom out, and what happens at that point is you get sugar cravings, you get carbohydrate cravings. So again, this creates this cycle where you are storing fat and facilitating hunger, and storing fat and facilitating hunger. So conversely, meal B is going to be a meal that is going to include some healthy high fiber carbohydrates. That might be a whole grain bread. That might be fruits and vegetables. That might be beans. That might be nuts and seeds. It might include some lean meats. But these foods are not going to be apt to spike blood sugar levels, and they're not going to create a corresponding spike in insulin. So these foods are going to be more likely to keep your blood sugar stable, keep your insulin levels stable. So again, that's not going to signal the body to store fat. It's going to create more consistent energy throughout the time of the day, and it's going to help you maintain weight. So now that we've talked about kind of those four key hormones that help to regulate our appetite and the hunger and satiety kind of cycles that we go through, let's look at a few food choices that ideally, if we're trying to maintain our weight, we probably want to avoid. So these are the foods that ultimately are going to stimulate hunger down the road sooner, ideally, than we would want to have it take place if we're trying to maintain our weight. So we will tackle this in part 2 of our discussion.